Hi, good morning. Out of respect to the people who are here on time, I think we'll get started. So welcome to Junior Faculty Development Forum. There's a whole bunch of busy slides, but I do have to go through them real quick. This is our Junior Faculty Development Forum, and this is a CME program accredited by the University of Cincinnati. So we just have to let you know who the presenters are and that we don't have any disclosures. I think maybe one of our presenters has disclosures. They're all listed over here. Otherwise, everybody else is sadly conflict-free. And yes, including myself. And so that's it. This is called the Front Matter, and this is what I'm supposed to open the Junior Faculty Development Forum with. So we have actually a star-studded cast of people. I'm not including myself, but everybody else who's coming after me is really going to be giving you a whole bunch of pearls and tips and tricks and all that. And this, you can see, is a pretty small, intimate forum, so we hope that you get a lot out of it. We are here to answer any questions, and really, when we did it last year, we actually got a lot of good feedback that it was a small, intimate forum where people were actually able to take back things from it. And as I mentioned, star-studded cast, Dr. Shah walking in, yes? Perfect. So our agenda today, this is what the agenda looks like. And so the first one, I'm going to kick it off with Get Published Now. It's an easy, talk to have during breakfast. And then Dr. Gottlieb is going to talk to us about how to publish prolifically. So I'm really excited to hear about that. Then Dr. Raja is going to talk to us about negotiating your next position, salary and beyond. And then Dr. Shah is going to be giving us the cool talk on establishing a narrative for a successful academic career, like the whole thing, your whole career. We'll then have lunch, and we're going to actually play a game. It's called The Power of Networking. It's like one of my favorite games. So you'll see, and we'll give you all the tools you need for that. After that, we are going to, that includes lunch, right? Then we're going to have a talk on time management, because who here doesn't want to have their time more efficiently managed, right? And then in the afternoon, we're going to have making the most of career opportunities. So basically, the faculty are going to be sitting at different tables, and depending on what you're interested in, whether it's like EMS or corporate medicine or community or leadership, education, research, we'll have different faculty who will be kind of just waiting to talk to you about each of those different fields. And then finally, we'll wrap up with personal pathways in academia by some senior academicians who will kind of tell you like how they got to where they got to. And sometimes it was planned and sometimes it was serendipity, but what you can learn from that. Anyone have any questions or anything like that before we start? I would like to, since we're a small group, I would like to just kind of go around the room, and if you don't mind, just kind of say your name, where you're from, and maybe what level of training you're at. Welcome to my residence. So maybe we can start here with the first table if you want to introduce yourself.
So I'm Rachel. I am currently a fellow at Boston Medical Center.
And what are you doing your fellowship in?
I'm finishing a fellowship in ultrasound, and I'll be starting a fellowship as well.
Okay.
I'm Sam Parnell. I'm on the faculty of UT Southwestern in Dallas.
I'm Jasmine Chan. I'm at Rush in Chicago. I'm a simulation fellow. I'll be at University of Texas in Houston starting in August.
Yep.
People are ones that affect your residence at UCF, Ocala.
I'm Ben Elaine. I'm one of the first-year faculty at Cincinnati and focused on healthcare value research.
I'm Daniel Shaw. I am a fellow in clinical operations at Beth Israel.
Cool. Shane, you want to start?
Ryan Kerr, faculty at UAB.
Martin Drumwell, current ultrasound fellow at University of Nebraska, going to be starting core faculty White County Medical Center in Arkansas.
Justine Co. I'm one of the sports medicine fellows at SR Health. I'll be starting at Cme.
Teresa Bull, first year faculty at the University of Iowa.
Josh Patton.
And ladies, can you guys introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, sir. I'm Valerie Pierre. I'm ultrasound fellow at NYU. I am an air
Excellent. Okay, so we'll get started. I'm going to do a really quick talk on Get Published Now. Please feel free to get coffee and breakfast while I'm talking. I totally won't be offended. So I'm Latha Ganti. I'm the Vice Chair for Research and Academic Affairs at the University of Central Florida, and I'm dedicating this talk to my dad, who is the reason that I publish as much as I do, but not as much as Dr. Gottlieb. And my dad is actually not a physician, but when I was raising my kids, who are now much older, he would always say, well, why are you home? Is our paper done yet? I'm like, no, it's not. He says, well, why are you here? Your mom and I have the kids. Go back to the office and finish your paper. So if I've ever gotten anything done, it's because he made me. So just a quick show of hands. Who here hasn't published anything yet? Oh, wow. So everyone's published something. That's great. Who here has 5 or more publications? Nice job. 10 or more? Very good. And 20 or more? Okay, excellent. So I know a lot of you have published, so that's great. So some of this might be a little bit elementary, but hopefully it's fun nonetheless. And this is Dr. Gottlieb, who's one of our speakers, and he's going to go right after me and tell you how to be super prolific. Okay, so I'm going to skip through some of this stuff. I put this slide up here only to kind of let you know that, yes, it can be done with the rest of life, because a lot of comments that I get is, well, I'm really busy, you know, like I have kids, I have this, I have that. I had my first child in residency, and I have 5 children. And so I think you can do it if you want to do it. You just have to find little pockets of time to do it, and there is a time management talk coming up later in the session as well, so you will get plenty of tips and tricks to do that. Please. So I always hear from people, you know, I'm going to start to write once I am on vacation, once I get a shift reduction, once I start maternity leave. That's my favorite one, because they think, oh my God, I'm going to get 6 weeks off, right? That's, yeah, doesn't happen. Once the new ED is built, because when I go to work, I am not feeling inspired. Once I get a new boss, because he or she is the reason I can't publish anything. So these are my boys, all between the years of 2000 and 2006, and those are the years I spent not only birthing them, but also trying to finish residency and trying to be a productive faculty member. And so there are 4 of them that were born in the span of 6 years, and so I was pretty much always pregnant, always pumping for that entire, it felt like a decade. And here they are now. So I would like to say the perfect time to write is right now. My oldest is actually going to be a second-year med student soon. So there's a ton of different types of publications, right? So when you say you want to publish, you can publish a clinical image, you can do a case report, a review article, a whole bunch of different things that don't necessarily require you to be a researcher, right? So we'll go through real quickly the different types of publications. Can I just close that real quick? Sorry, we kept it open for the ventilation. So clinical images are the easiest type of publication, right? Because all you need is like a really good picture and then 150 to 200 words and a high resolution image. The key is, of course, finding the right journal, like who's going to publish your image. Some journals like EKGs, some journals do not. Some people want a clinical photograph, some people don't care. So I'm going to show you this one. This is way back in the day. You can see it's like 2004. So I was junior faculty, and I was working a night shift, and I walk into the room, I introduce myself, and the guy's like, I have a sore throat. So I'm like, oh, let me take a look. He opens his throat, and I go, wow. And he's like, hey, you want to take a picture? And I was like, okay, that's weird. No. And then I get paged out, like this is in the day of pagers. So I go back to the desk and I check my pager and I answer the page. And as I'm doing that, I'm looking at my computer screen and this email pops up, right? And the email says, submit your great clinical image to New England Journal of Medicine. And I was like, oh my God, yes, so this is for me. This is personal. Of course it was mass email, but I felt it was personal just for me. And so I go back into the room and I said, do you actually mind if I take a picture? So the guy said, oh, no, I've always wanted to be a model. So he gets all ready for me, and I take out my Nokia flip phone, and I take a picture. And, yeah, so there we go. That's probably the only thing I've published in NEJM, but still, it's okay. So if you are going to publish a clinical image, make sure that you label everything that you want them to see, right? Obviously, you have to get informed consent for photos. And you want to put arrows to highlight the areas of interest. The other thing that's really helpful is to provide a ruler or state the magnification so people understand what they're looking at. See, if I look at this picture, it doesn't freak me out. I mean, I don't like bugs, so it's okay, but at least I can see it's about a centimeter long. But if you show me that picture, then I'm going to have all sorts of like issues, right? So here's another clinical picture, because now we got fancy. After the first publication, we were like, oh, hey. And so this is a young lady she was 84 years old, or 83, I think, yeah, 83. And she basically went to have tea with her equally young 84-year-old friend. And the friend says to her, hey, your mascara's running. And she said, well, I'm not wearing mascara. So, they decide to come to the emergency department, and basically it's just a conjunctival bleed. But it made for a cool picture, and at this point we were very, fancy. So we put the ruler magnification on there, and that is my gloved finger. So I just want to say, like, I'm a hand model. Yeah, that's where that is. So next thing is case reports, right? Good early publication, doesn't need a study design. Anybody can do a case report. And I always like to say that everybody has a case, right? So like, what does everybody here do? Whether you're in research, education, whatever, what does everyone do? We all see patients. In a single shift that you see, even if it's a slow place, how many patients do you see? At least a dozen patients, right? I mean, this is like a really slow ED. So every single day, you have potentially 12 case reports. So that's kind of how I think about it. Every patient that you see can be a potential case report. And if you're working in a large, residency program or academic center, what you should do is consent every patient, because you never know when somebody's going to need a case report or when you might be writing a case report. And literally, you can write a case report on corneal abrasion. You can write a case report on ankle fracture. You can write a case report on run-of-the-mill ischemic stroke. It can be anything. Can anyone here tell me the difference between a case report that gets published and a case report that does not? That you just submitted it. If you don't submit it, it definitely will not get published, right? That's guaranteed. There are a few things in life that are guaranteed, but there you go. I just gave you something that's 100% guaranteed. If you submit it, it will get in somewhere. And so that is really the main message with that. All right, what about a review article? Review articles are great. They're often commissioned by journals. If you have a passion area that you want to talk about, then you can reach out to a journal editor and say, hey, I'm dying to write this review on like pulmonary embolism. No worries, you can do that, and sometimes they'll say sure, sometimes they'll say, we already have plenty of those, thank you. It's great if they're in your area of expertise. So let's say you want to become a pulmonary embolism expert. You might take this on, and you might say, okay, I'm going to really do a great job writing a review paper, learn everything there is to learn on PE. I'm going to become the PE expert. In that case, it's a really good idea. But if it's not, if I'm interested in stroke and then I want to all of a sudden write a paper on pediatric GU emergencies, it's going to take me a lot of work to get that done, right? But if it is in your area, it's great, because you can spin it into a book chapter, you can spin it into a lecture, it can be your grand rounds, and so you can get a lot more bang for your buck for doing the same thing. And they're highly cited. Why are they highly cited? Anytime you write a paper, so let's say you're writing about your research in pulmonary embolism, for example, then what is that intro paragraph? That intro paragraph is simply citing review articles. PE is a common presentation, it's a high-stakes diagnosis, it's more common in the following people. You need a review article quotations for that. So that's why they're highly cited. What about a letter to the editor? So letter to the editor does count as a publication. I've been on plenty of promotion tenure committees, and even though they tell you it's not really like a heavy publication, literally when we're at these meetings, we'll look at the lists and we're like, oh yeah, they have 57. Okay, yeah, this works. And it's so disheartening, because when I was on the other side of it, I was told, oh, that doesn't count, it has to be in a high impact journal, it's got to have this, it's got to have that. Then when I'm on the committee side making these decisions, I would, in the beginning, I would say, we shouldn't count this, and this doesn't matter, and I haven't heard of this journal, and it was just like, oh wow, you must be new. So yeah, anyhow. Of course, you have to get it submitted in a timely fashion. You can't be in your bathroom, look at JAMA from like 8 years ago, be all inspired to then write a letter to editor about that study. Like, the time has passed, right? And I also don't recommend stacking your journals in the bathroom, because like roaches really like that. So then the next type of study is surveys, right? Surveys is a good way for clinician educators to publish. Why is that? because you can incorporate a survey in anything you do. So if you do an EMS project, if you're doing like a faculty survey, if you're doing any kind of committee work, all of those things lend themselves well to surveys, right? The thing is, journals will generally look for an 80% response rate. So what about that? What if you don't get an 80% rate? What can you do? Okay, so if I survey the entire membership of ASAP, like 12,000 physicians, right? What will be my survey response rate? 15%. Okay, yeah, so it's around like 10 to 12%. So is a journal going to take that? I mean, I say that you generally look for 80%. 10 is not very close to 80, right? So it's going to be a hard time. But let's say the residency program director is going to survey his residents. What do you think the survey response rate will be? 100%, right? And so you can definitely control the population that you are surveying. So you have to think about the denominator, right? Who are the people you're surveying? How can you increase your survey response rate? It's actually generally difficult to design good surveys. If you're surveying your colleagues or your residents, it's okay. But if you're surveying patients, you have to remember that there is a health literacy level. And if their health literacy level is low, then you are writing questions at your level, you're not going to get actually good answers, right? So you have to kind of think about that. Many places, like when I worked at Mayo, there was an entire survey research building where you could just kind of walk in, make an appointment, they design your surveys, they do focus groups for you, all that kind of stuff. Sadly, I'm not there anymore, so like now when I make a survey, it's all up to me to figure out literacy level and how to write unambiguous questions and such. So one of the questions that I often get from people is, well, you know, it's easy because, you know, you have a data set and you just publish from your data set, but I'm in education, I do all this work, and I can't get published. You know, it's really hard. Like, I'm always scanning with the residents. I'm always, like, teaching the residents. I'm always doing all this highly education-heavy, hands-on, time, labor-intensive work, and I don't get any credit for my work. And we had a junior ultrasound faculty person, and she was awesome. I mean, she did so much work with all the residents. And then when she went for her faculty review, guess what our chair said? He said, well, you can't be promoted because you've written absolutely nothing. And so she comes out of the office like crying, basically, because she's like, I do all this work for the department. My whole work is with this department. And now the guy tells me, like, I'm basically not good enough. So here's what I would say. When you're thinking about what you can publish, think about the things we do. We all practice. Every single one of us practices, right? So within the realm of practice, what can you write about? You can write about quality project outcomes. You can write about systems issues. I mean, who here has worked in a place that does not have systems issues? No one, right? You have. I actually know where you work, so I can't agree. But implementation of a care pathway, practice guidelines. So let's say a new practice guideline comes out, right? Like a couple years ago, Thoracic Society came out with guidelines for pulmonary embolism and D-dimers in different populations. Maybe you applied those guidelines in your shop and you want to report on how that went. Maybe there's an algorithm. I mean, it can be something simple, like you have a stroke algorithm. Everybody else has one too, but maybe you're just going to talk about how the algorithm went at your shop. And so that could be a paper. If you're within education, you can write about curricular innovations. You can write about effectiveness of an educational tool. Maybe you introduced new things in your residency program, a new rotation, a new way of doing things. You can write about those. And then, of course, in traditional research, you have all of the different types of traditional research studies, and I won't spend a lot of time on that. Then if you think beyond emergency medicine, right? Think about emergency medicine intersects with so many other fields. So we first talked about the typical traditional academic stuff, practice, research, education. But you can take each of those and go even beyond, right? So if you're in practice, you can talk about health economics, management, politics, law, because a lot of what we do intersects with those fields. If you're talking about education, you can then branch into education research, which is, you know, its own thing, and there's actually a workshop on that here today. But like traditional education research, psychology, sociology. And then if you're in research, you can do regular research like the way we know it, or you can also branch out into health services, biostatistics, epidemiology. So this slide is really just to kind of get people's brains thinking about all of the different things that you can publish. So, like I said, I get a lot of, oh, well, you know, you have all this data, so it's easy for you to publish. But you can also consider pre-existing data sets. You don't have to have your own data set. You don't need your own trauma registry. You don't need your own stroke registry. You can find data sets that already exist and analyze these data sets. This is obviously super busy slide, but what you see here is that each of these clicks gives you access to different types of data. Practice innovation is another type of paper. And a practice innovation is something where you maybe have a tool that you use in the emergency department. One example that always comes to mind for me is one of my colleagues who does a lot of nasotracheal intubations. He would put that birthday thing that you blow on and it comes out, and he would put that at the end of the tube, and that's how he would know that he was in the airway. A next type of paper is systematic review and meta-analysis, and these are actually an excellent way to learn a topic because it really makes you appraise the literature. And one of the other really good things about it is that many, many journals love publishing these things. So depending on which journal you're talking about, like AEM does brass tacks. There's other places where you can publish it as a systematic review abstract. I'm forgetting kind of all the names, but each of the journals will have, like, you know, they'll have best bets, they'll have evidence-based medicine. They all have these like distilled versions of things. So this is not new research. This is summarizing somebody else's research on the topic. And so this is open to everyone, right? All of us practice emergency medicine. We can all do these things. It's, of course, nice to have standing gigs. You know, like if you write for any of these journals, then you'll have an easy way to keep saying, well, I did 4 of these. Can I do another one? And then real quick, and I'm trying to finish quickly because I do want to stay on time. Much original research in a department never gets published. So I heard here there's a lot of fellows, and you're going to be starting in new departments, or maybe you're going to start faculty in your own department. Try to find out what research is already there and kind of just waiting for somebody to like take it on. I mean, this is the same thing, you know, I told my son who's a medical student, I said, go to the department and tell them like you're available and you're free and you have all this free time and you can just dust off the old projects. And that is a really good way to get started because you'll be surprised. A lot of people will say, yes, please, thank you, take it. You just publish it. It's like 97% done and I just haven't had any time. I always thought when I was a young person, like, why would they give me all this work that they've already done? Why don't they just publish it themselves? Now that I'm old, I know why. Because they're busy and there's all these other things taking up their time. And they would love to have it published, but it's like, you know, number 97 on the list. If you are going to create a clinical data set of your own, you have to define the population. And then, so let's say you're looking at hemorrhagic stroke. How do you know how many people you need in your data set? How many chart reviews do you have to do? The answer is it depends, right? What does it depend on? The number of people who have the desired outcome. So if you're looking at death after ICH, fortunately, it's good. You don't need a lot of people because half of them die, right? But if you're looking at death after vasovagal syncope, you're going to need thousands and thousands of people because most people don't die after vasovagal syncope. Hard outcomes are always better than soft outcomes. So when you're a junior researcher and you're trying to make your name, it's always better if you have outcomes that people can't argue with. You say, these were predictors of death. Death is pretty certain, right? So at least I'm not looking at soft outcomes. Different types of variables, and again, it's not a research talk, so I'll go through it really quickly, but you have different ways to categorize your variables: continuous, dichotomous, categorical, or ordinal. And these will determine the types of statistical tests that you do. When you have things that are kind of softer outcomes, it's better to make them into numbers. So instead of saying, well, how depressed do you feel? It's better if you can give them a scale, because when you are then analyzing your data, you will have numbers that you can analyze. How easy was it to get follow-up? Maybe they gave you a whole answer to, it wasn't easy, and let me tell you why. While that is extremely valuable information, it is hard to put that into statistics. So maybe you capture the text, and then you also capture the number, right? You can do a Likert scale and ask them how easy or how difficult it was. The good thing about having text data is you can do word cloud analyses and kind of see like what was the most vexing thing that keeps on coming up again and again and again. So the free text answers are definitely not useless because actually they give you a lot of insight into the barriers that patients are facing. Whenever I start a research project, I always make this picture. So whatever the event I'm studying goes in the middle, And then I always list all my independent variables and then all my dependent variables, right? Again, I'm not trying to make it into a research talk, but the reason I wanted to just show this one slide is if you are leading a lab or a group or a team or whoever, if you have one thing that you are looking at, if you have 5 independent variables and 5 dependent variables, how many abstracts can you get? 25. So then all my residents are taken care of and everybody can have their little abstract, right? So it's great. Now, maybe not every abstract becomes a paper, but with one data set, and you know the deadline for ASAP is May 18th, so it's like weighing on me right now, I can at least get my job done, right? And everybody can be on everybody else's papers, which then helps everybody get more numbers of papers. I'm gonna skip this one. Research reporting guidelines, depending on what type of research you do, and which journal. Sorry, I'm gonna check the time. Okay. So then, which journal? A lot of people will say, where do I submit to? This is a web link that you can click on, and basically what it does is you put the title of your paper. So maybe you put in fibromyalgia exacerbation, right? And I might think that maybe it goes to emergency medicine journals or something, because that's where I work. But you might find that actually the top 7 journals that publish this stuff is rheumatology. And those are not journals I usually submit to. So it might be a useful way to figure out which other journals might like my topic. And then open access versus traditional. Open access is where you pay a fee to make it free for everybody to read your article. Many journals are becoming open access these days, so I mean, I can answer any further questions about that later. Acceptance rate is also important. So you have to kind of decide, like, what's the purpose of your paper? Is you want to get it into the best possible journal? Of course, that's great. Or is it, well, I'm looking for a job in 12 months, and so I just want to get published a couple of quick things so I can like prove I'm academic and then get to the next step. So you have to kind of figure out like how long do they take to accept. So I have had one paper that took 24 months to get into Annals, and literally from the first time I submitted it, after the bajillion reviews I made, the final version was pretty much the first version that I submitted, because I changed it so many times, I went back to the initial draft. The other thing is to diversify. So if you are submitting something to a journal and it is not getting picked up by the journal, and you go ahead and you submit to Annals and Academic EM and iGEM and AGEM and all these places, you know, maybe they just don't like it. So maybe then you go to a specialty journal. And some of these stats might be a little bit dated, but I was going to tell a funny story about neurocritical care, which is at the bottom over there at 60%. This is when it first started. So I was at the American, please, if you want to come in, you can come in. I think it was at AAN, American Academy of Neurology, and I was presenting a poster, and I was really excited. I was presenting on leukocytosis and stroke, and this guy comes up to me and he tells me like how amazing my poster is, that it's really important work, that I've got to get it published, and I am just soaking up all of this, you know, like attention. And, you know, he comes closer and he goes, no, I mean, I just want to tell you, like, it's really important that you get this published soon, you know? So I said, yeah, for sure. Like, we're just going to go back to the hotel room and write the paper. We're not even going to go out tonight. And so he hands me this card and he says, listen, I'm the editor-in-chief for Neurocritical Care, so I can help you out, you know? I thought it was a little weird, but I was like, okay. So we went back and we submitted it, and it got in, and we were really excited. Then we dusted off all our rejected papers, and we submitted them, and they got accepted. So we were like, oh, this is great. And then finally, like a year later, we submit another rejected paper, and it gets rejected. So then I call him up, and I said, hey, you rejected my paper. There must be a mistake. He said, oh, no, we're good now. We have a critical mass, so we don't need to take your rejected papers. So I was like, oh, I see. Okay, well. So when new journals start, it's really easy to get your work in there. We started iGEM like many, many years ago, and literally when we started, it was the same thing. We called all our friends, and we said, hey, we have a new journal, so if you have anything rejected that you're looking to get published, we'll publish it for you. We'll even edit it for you. And so that's how we got our first issue out. And then 18 months after we launched, it was PubMed indexed. And usually they will PubMed index everything retroactively, so that's good. Time to first decision. You have to look at how long journals take to get published. Now, they're averages, of course, you have a buddy on the editorial board, it goes faster and things like that. But this is like for the lay people, right? I am still trying to find an angle to my research that I can submit to the Journal of Biological Chemistry. I would love to get in 6 days. I think one journal I didn't put on here is Curious. That's actually super fast as well. We've gotten things published in Curious, I think, in like 4 days. So there are a lot of new journals, and I just look around. So diversify, I think I said that. Your work may be too visionary for a given journal, for sure. When we first started in stroke, we submitted a paper on hypotension and stroke outcomes, and we said that it was really bad for you to have low blood pressure because you were going to do much worse after your stroke. So the emergency medicine, so we submitted it to neurology first, and they thought it was amazing. And they published it, and they did a CME with it, and an editorial with it. And in the interest of time, I will skip the backstory, but maybe during Pathways I'll tell it. And so we had published a ton of work in neurology. And then after we were kind of like established, and this was like a thing, we submitted to an emergency medicine journal. I got an auto reject. It just said, well, obviously hypotension is bad. We see this every day. I was like, wow, you totally missed the point, and you don't even know, like, we're famous, but whatever. So yeah, your work might be too visionary for a given journal. And things that are not of interest to emergency medicine, because it's run-of-the-mill for us, and we resuscitate and save people and reverse things every single day, we don't think it's a big deal. We're like, that's just a regular day. Your blood pressure is low. Of course I give you saline, right? So you might want to put it in a specialty journal. If you submit your work to 3, 4 emergency medicine journals and they reject it, don't submit it to a 5th emergency medicine journal, because it's the same reviewers. I have personally reviewed a paper 4 times for 4 different emergency medicine journals. They didn't make any of the changes, and they just resubmitted it as is, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to have to reject it this time. So don't tax the same set of reviewers. But every paper has a home. Newer journals are easier to publish in, and they do get indexed. And then you can seek out niche journals. So we did a project on electrocardiographic intervals in the octogenarian population. So I thought the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology would be perfect, but my team thought that we should submit it 5 other places first. We did, it got rejected. And then finally, when they took my choice, we got it into the Journal of Geriatric Cardiology without any changes, as is. They just took it as is. So, gotta figure out where you want to go. Okay, so if you've submitted your work and you've been rejected, what do you do? So there are many categories of rejection, right? It could be seriously flawed research, it could be flaws in your grammar, it could be that you submitted it to a basic science journal and you're doing clinical science, or it might be that they just published 5 case reports on spontaneous mediastinum and yours was the 6th, so just bad luck. If it's seriously flawed research, what can you do? It might still be salvageable. You could resubmit to a non-peer-reviewed journal, which I don't really recommend because what's the point? Nobody can find it. You might conduct supplemental research, or you might change your hypothesis. So when we started our stroke work like many years ago, we put together a data set and we sent out all the variables to emergency medicine and neurology, and everybody told us it was good. And then we made a data set and we filled out our data set by hand, and everything was great. We sent it to all the people multiple times, asked people if they wanted to be on it. And they all said, yeah, it looks good, girls. It was me and my fellow. And then we submitted to the Journal of Neurology, and they wrote back this handwritten letter. And they said, well, we're really excited that finally emergency medicine is getting into the stroke world. And we find your hypothesis of low blood pressure and stroke outcome to be fascinating. But we don't understand how you can make any comment when you've not accounted for stroke severity. And we're like, oh, stroke severity. Okay, yeah, like no one mentioned that to us. And this, of course, we were junior people. And then he goes on to say, as you know, the stroke severity can be mentioned but can be calculated with the NIH-SS, and this can be done retrospectively. And he gave us the journal reference to go with it. And he said, I would be pleased to reconsider your draft if you could account for stroke severity and resubmit your work. So this meant going back to 335 charts by hand and re-entering the data And we were young and we had nothing else to do, so that's exactly what we did. We reordered the charts for medical records, sat on the floor, by hand entered all the data, and it took us 334 days to do it. So a whole year went by before we could input the data. We re-input the data, and then of course when you're analyzing, you don't know if any of the data is going to hold now, right? So when we finally click submit for the stats, thankfully it came out significant. So we're very happy, and that was the paper that was published in Neurology. But along the way, we faced so many different things. I mean, people telling us like, oh, you're emergency medicine, why do you want to do stroke research? People telling us like, okay, girls, don't worry about it, like we'll just do it. Oh, you got accepted to the American Academy of Neurology. Well, the reviewers must have been soft this year. Like so many comments. And you just take those comments and you just filter them out. Don't worry about it. So you do want to learn from your mistakes. Here he says, I've got my bandages to protect me. And don't wait too long before you address your rejections. This gaming the system slide is going to be nothing compared to Dr. Gottlieb's lecture, so I'm going to skip that. And how you get started is give yourself a deadline, publicize it. Engage whoever you think will be on your tail to get it done. For me, it was my dad. Have a timeline, and then just start writing, because there's never going to be a good time, or you could flip it around and say it's always a good time. So it says you have all the words. I have all the words I need for my novel. It's just a case of putting them in the right order. So that's my summary. I am sorry I flew through it super fast, but I usually lecture for like 90 minutes for this talk, so I really tried to cut out as much as I could. This is the CME slide. I'll show it again at the end of the session, but basically you want to do it before July 31st in order to be able to get the CME for this.